the summer of 1984, I was a student here at the University of Florida, and I was working part-time at the city planning department. I was studying urban studies to become a city planner, and I was living in an apartment on Southwest 16th Avenue. And one morning in July, very early, a little after 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and realized that a man had broken into my apartment. And I woke up to someone straddling me and pinning my arms down and gagging and blindfolding me. And instantly, I felt simply shock and disbelief. All I thought was, this cannot be happening to me. Within a few seconds, the man told me that if I fought or screamed or tried to get away, that he had a knife and he would use it. And he cut the side of my hand, maybe to make sure that I understood. And that's when the panic set in. And I thought, is he alone? Are there two men? Are they going to take turns? And then I thought about my mom, who lived in Seattle, and what it would be like for her if she got a phone call from the Gainesville police telling her that I was in a hospital and I had been stabbed or that I had been killed. And then the only thing that mattered was, I have to live through this, because I didn't think my mom would ever recover from a phone call like that. And so, in the next few seconds, I just kept repeating two sentences. And one of the sentences was, and again, these were silent because I couldn't speak, but I kept saying the sentence, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. And when it was done, he was finished, and he left, and there was only one man, it turned out, I had been raped vaginally and anally. Life is made up of a million moments, and some of them are so beautiful, and some of them are so intense and terrifying that it's hard to imagine if you will ever live past them. But here's what mattered. I did live, and I am here to tell this story. I don't know a lot about the man who attacked me. I do know that he had been released 10 months before this happened to Gainesville, and he was released from prison. He had received a life sentence, but he had only served 8 years before he was released. He received a life sentence for burglarizing, which means breaking into someone's apartment, and in that particular case, it was a 79-year-old woman who he raped and strangled. And when he was caught here in Gainesville, a few weeks after I reported the case, he was charged with 4 cases. 4 cases of sexual battery, 3 involving women, of which I was one, and 1 involving a young man who was in his 20s. Same thing. All of us, our homes were broken into, we were all tied up, gagged, blindfolded, and all of us vaginally and or anally raped. For a long time afterwards, I had a really hard time. For over a year, I worked on just being able to sleep through the night and not wake up at 3:08 in the morning. And I was humiliated and I was terrified by the things that this stranger had done to me and said to me. But there's a life lesson, too, in this, and that is that every single thing you feel is not permanent. It changes. I also felt a great deal of shame for not being able to prevent what had happened to me. I think that when something really huge and tragic and traumatic happens, I really, really believe that it forces you to revise your theory of why really scary and traumatic things happen to you or to the people that you love. Because back then, this is what I believed. I really believed that if you wanted to prevent a rape from happening to you, you could. You could do it by fighting, by screaming, by being extremely selective about who you hung out with. And I really believed that if you were ever in that situation, I could scream, I could fight, I was strong, I was independent, I could talk someone out of doing something horrific to me. And I also believed this, that if other people knew what had happened to me, that they would think the same thing. Did you scream? Did you fight? Did you fight for everything that was in you? Had you locked your outside doors? Had you locked your bedroom doors? Did you pick a safe apartment to live in? Did you pick a safe part of town to live in? So what I came to realize is this. Cooperation and compliance, when it comes from a place of terror or the threat of harm, doesn't mean it was consent. I was 23 years old when this happened to me, and for the next 23 years, I didn't talk about this. I didn't tell my story to anyone, and I didn't describe to any of my close friends at all. My mother knew, and my sister knew. My boyfriend at the time knew. But otherwise, I did not tell this story at all to anyone, except once every 4 years when I go up to Tallahassee to speak in front of a parole commission and try to explain why I think this criminal, this serial rapist, should never, ever, ever be allowed to be released from prison. I think people vary in their ability and their desire and their need to share their stories and tell their stories. For me, what happened to me was very private and very, very upsetting. And I really didn't think about the man who had attacked me, other than I was grateful that he hadn't killed me. But otherwise, I just wanted my life to return to normal. I just wanted it to go back to the way it was. So I stayed really busy. And I went to classes, and I got my degree, and I got a job. And the boyfriend at the time, I married him, and he became my husband. And then we welcomed a daughter into the world, and then we welcomed a son. And then our lives got busy with all the things that happened, like picking out preschools and going to playgrounds and going to pediatric appointments and going shopping. And it is, as they say, your life goes on. And it does. It does go on. That's a merciful thing about life. I was 23 at the time, and 23 years later, I decided that I wanted to confront him. I wanted to be the first person in the state of Florida to request a victim-offender dialogue with this inmate while he was in prison. So I contacted the Florida officials, and I said, I want you to arrange this meeting with me and him in the prison, and I want to confront him. And so they requested, would you meet with one of the 4 victims from the 1984 case? And initially, he said yes, he would. Now, I was really scared. I have to tell you, I may sound like this was very brave, but I was really scared because I was nervous about what I would feel and what I would re-experience as it got closer to the date. But I also felt like, you've got to understand, I never saw this person. Back in 1985, we did not have Florida guidelines for fair treatment. There was no notification to victims that this person is going back to get sentenced, or this person is going to jail, or you have the right to speak to a judge before the sentencing. So I never saw this person ever. And I also felt that while I was nervous, I felt he is the only one that can answer questions that I have. Questions like, why did you pick me? How did you know that I was alone in my apartment? Is there anything I could have done differently that would have stopped you from doing what you did? Now, I can't say these are questions other people feel, but these were questions that had been something I struggled with for a long time, and that's why I really wanted to confront him, to face him and confront him. Well, 4 days later, I got a phone call from the Department of Corrections telling me that the inmate backed out. He changed his mind, and he would not speak to me, ever. And I have to tell you, I was devastated. I absolutely was angry, and I was frustrated, and I felt like, he's got all the control again. He's the one that gets to decide. And I just, it just was so hard to realize once again he had all the power. So I did the only thing that made sense. 4 days later, I sat down at my dining room table, and I started writing and writing and writing. And 23 hours later, I wrote a screenplay about what would have happened if we had met. And this time I was in control. I simply wrote about what would have happened if we had met and how the conversation would have gone and what he would have said and what I would have asked. And this time, I won't say I got to play God, but I got to decide how it went. And it was a huge relief. So, the screenplay, I ended up showing it to this amazing UF professor named James Babanikos. And even though I'm not a film student, of course, he did this wonderful thing. He produced it into a film, and he created Somewhere Beyond. The line Somewhere Beyond comes from this poet, Rumi, and he has beautiful poems, but there's a line that goes like this: somewhere between wrongdoing and right doing is a place. I'll meet you there. And so I'm really grateful, because obviously I'm not responsible for anything other than writing a screenplay. He took it to the next level, and that was really, I didn't want it to go to Sundance or anything like that. I really wrote it for me, by me and for me. And I have to tell you, I felt relief. And I also felt like I didn't feel as ashamed and self-conscious about what had happened to me. And that was a huge relief. So I've spent the last 29 years, I didn't end up doing that whole urban studies, urban planning thing, but I took a turn. Sometimes stories do that. And I've been an advocate for victims of crime for the last 29 years. And it's a profession where you get to help change the end of people's stories. I meet with all sorts of amazing people who have been utterly destroyed in some ways by the unthinkable things of DUIs and drunk driving and murders and death and sadness and emptiness and shame. And, you know, the reality is you can't erase things like rape. You can't erase traumatic things that happen in people's life. But you know what? You really can dilute devastation with kindness and decency and respect and justice and regaining control of your life. It goes a long way. So last year, I decided that it was time to step forward and help other people who I believed had been impacted by shame. If you look at the national statistics, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 16 men will be sexually assaulted during their college years. That over 50% of sexual battery victims still do not report the crime. That 80% of sexual battery victims know their attacker because it's a family member, a friend, a significant other. And what I realized is that this thing, shame, we haven't really addressed it. We've done some amazing stuff with consent and bystander intervention, but it's time to really address shame, because it is such a powerful motivator that will keep people from either disclosing or reporting or believing that they should even seek out services for fear that people will, what, blame them or shame them for what the circumstances that happened. So I don't know how many of you saw this Oscar-winning film this year called Spotlight. Anybody see that? A few people? All right. There's this powerful and brutal line from the film, and I think it really talks about the power of shame. One of the journalists is talking about this particular priest who had molested dozens and dozens and hundreds of kids. And in the film, the reporter says, this priest picked boys not because he preferred boys, but because he knew that shame would keep them silent, and they wouldn't tell anyone. That line, along with my own experience and recognizing the experience of literally thousands of people who've intersected my life through this work I do, encouraged me to create Facebook, Unshame, and unshame.org. And if you haven't seen it, and you're interested or you'd like to help spread the message, I want to invite you to go to Facebook or to unshame.org and see this amazing platform of messages that we've created for anyone. Messages of resilience and hope and compassion, because I think it will help make a difference. 2 months ago, we created something called, one more thing, called Me Too. And because of those statistics that I mentioned a minute or two ago. The thing about them is they're staggering and they're significant, but they're also invisible. And the reality is, when we talk about who is a sexual assault survivor, it's the person working in construction. It's your professor. It's your hairstylist. It's the person you sit beside at church. It's your child's teacher. They are us. They are us. And so what I'm inviting people to do is to wear a Me Too pin. And if you're a victim or survivor and you're ready and it's safe, I invite you to step forward and no longer feel the shame of saying or identifying as a sexual assault survivor. Because you know what is shameful about rape? Blaming a victim. And what I found over and over and over again is that when people see this, inevitably someone will say, I'm going to wear a button. So if you decide at the end of the night to go back, there's some table with some goodies, everything's free back there, take as much as you want. If you take a button, take two, because I promise you, if someone asks you, what does the Me Too button stand for? They'll ask you, where can I get one? Because I have a friend, a sister, I know someone. I think they are ready to come forward. So I guess what I want to say is this. At the beginning of this, I told you that my name is Gretchen, and I want the world to know what I know. There is absolutely no shame in being a survivor of sexual assault. And as for my story, it's not over yet. Thank you.